What if the real advantage in life has nothing to do with your IQ or education, but with a hidden mental operating system that a few people have secretly installed? For years, you've been told that success comes from working harder or being smarter. But I'm going to show you that's a lie. The real divider between those who struggle with decisions and those who navigate challenges with ease is one thing: a trained, strategic mind. While most operate on mental autopilot, reacting to whatever life throws at them, a select few have learned to command their own cognitive processes. They see patterns where others see chaos. Today, we're completely rewiring how you think. You'll discover how to identify the mental blind spots that sabotage your judgment, and master the cognitive tools that let you dominate any complex situation you face. This isn't about memorizing facts. It's about upgrading the very processor your brain uses to analyze the world. By the end of this, your relationship with problems will be transformed. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you'll approach them with a quiet confidence, knowing you have the mental framework to dismantle them. Let's lay the foundation for strategic intelligence. Most people go through life playing mental tic-tac-toe, while the top performers are playing 4D chess. The difference isn't genius. It's method. Strategic intelligence is the skill of spotting connections others miss, forecasting outcomes before they're obvious, and positioning yourself for advantage in any scenario. But here's the critical insight everyone gets wrong. This isn't an innate gift. It's a trained, repeatable skill. It's built on 4 core pillars. The first is systems awareness. This means understanding that nothing exists in isolation. Where the average person sees a single problem, the strategic thinker sees an entire web of causes, effects, and interlinked relationships. For instance, if a company's sales drop, most might blame the marketing. A systems-aware thinker examines the whole ecosystem, competitor moves, market shifts, internal morale, supply chains, and global trends. They know the visible issue is usually just a symptom of a deeper systemic flaw. The second pillar is temporal vision. This is thinking across multiple time frames at once. Strategic minds aren't fixated on immediate results. They're constantly calculating how today's choices will ripple out in 6 months, 2 years, or even a decade. They grasp that the most significant consequences are rarely instant. This long-lens perspective lets them make moves that seem questionable now but create massive leverage over time. Consider an investor who holds assets for decades while others chase quarterly spikes. They're playing a different time game entirely. The third pillar is probabilistic reasoning. Instead of dealing in absolutes, strategic thinkers operate in likelihoods and ranges of potential outcomes. They don't ask, will this work? They ask, what's the percentage chance this works, and what are all the possible results? This lets them make sharper decisions amidst uncertainty and prepare for multiple futures at once. When a founder starts a company, they don't know it'll be a unicorn, but they calculate a high probability that a market trend will grow, positioning themselves to capture value no matter the specific outcome. The fourth pillar is leverage analysis. Strategic people are always hunting for pressure, points where minimal effort can create massive returns. They know not all actions are created equal, and they focus their energy on the tiny fraction of activities that deliver an outsized impact. This is why they often accomplish more with less strain. They're not grinding harder. They're identifying the high-leverage tasks. They might spend days thinking through one decision that saves them months of execution later. The quality of your thinking determines the yield of your effort. But building this intelligence requires more than just understanding these ideas. You must rewire your brain's factory settings. Our brains are optimized for surviving immediate physical threats, not for solving abstract modern puzzles strategic intelligence demands. We override these ancient shortcuts and train our minds to think with deliberate, systematic intention. It starts with metacognitive awareness, becoming conscious of your own thought processes. Most people are simply unaware of how they think. They have thoughts, but don't observe themselves thinking. Strategic thinkers cultivate an internal observer that can watch their own mental patterns in real time. This allows them to catch themselves falling into cognitive traps, notice when emotions are clouding their logic, and consciously choose a better thinking strategy, the next step is building cognitive agility. This is the skill of shifting between different thinking modes as the situation demands. Sometimes you need analytical thinking to break down a complex issue. Other times you need synthetic thinking to connect disparate ideas into a new pattern. Strategic thinkers build a toolkit of mental approaches and become adept at selecting the perfect tool for each challenge. They might use systematic analysis for technical problems, creative brainstorming for innovation, and game theory for competitive scenarios. Finally, strategic intelligence requires cultivating intellectual humility. This is the recognition that your first take on any situation is probably incomplete or flat out wrong. Most people suffer from overconfidence, clinging to their initial judgment. Strategic thinkers assume their first impression is flawed and actively hunt for evidence that proves them wrong. This humility lets them adapt and evolve continuously. They're not attached to being right. They're committed to finding the best path. Your brain is engineered to be efficient, which is another way of saying it's lazy to conserve energy. Your brain automates as much as possible, creating mental shortcuts called heuristics. These are great for routine tasks. You don't want to consciously think about tying your shoes. But these same energy savers trap you in autopilot when you face novel, complex challenges that need your full attention. Mental autopilot shows up in a few destructive ways. First is pattern matching without context. Your brain immediately searches for familiar situations and applies old solutions. This works when the match is perfect, but fails catastrophically when surface. Similarities hide fundamental differences. Business leaders who succeed in stable markets often fail in volatility because they keep using outdated strategies without seeing the underlying rules have changed. The second manifestation is emotional hijacking. Under stress, primitive parts of your brain designed for survival take over from your sophisticated reasoning centers. Stress hormones flood your system, damaging working memory, reducing mental flexibility, and narrowing your focus to immediate threats. This is why people often make their worst choices when the stakes are highest. The pressure triggers the mental state least capable of handling it. The third manifestation is cognitive conservatism, the tendency to stick with the familiar long after it stopped being optimal. Your brain treats new approaches as risky because they demand energy, while the old ways feel safe. This bias keeps people and entire organizations trapped in outdated patterns while the world moves on. Breaking free requires developing cognitive control, your ability to consciously direct your attention, override automatic responses, and choose more deliberate thinking paths. Think of it as building a mental override switch. The first step is creating trigger recognition systems. These are mental alarms that alert you when you've slipped into autopilot. Common triggers include feeling stuck on a problem, having a strong emotional reaction, or realizing you're avoiding a tough decision. When you notice these, it's time to shift gears. The next step is implementing cognitive debiasing techniques. These are specific mental drills designed to counteract your brain's lazy shortcuts. One powerful method is the outside view when analyzing a situation. Instead of getting lost in the details that make your case feel unique, step back and ask, what typically happens in situations like this? This forces you to consider base rates and statistical patterns. Another essential technique is prospective hindsight, or the primortem. Imagine your plan has spectacularly. Now work backward to figure out what must have gone wrong. This technique is shockingly good at revealing blind spots that normal planning misses. Third critical method is consider the opposite. Whenever you reach a strong conclusion, force yourself to build a compelling case for the opposite viewpoint. This isn't about becoming indecisive. It's about stress testing your reasoning to ensure it's sound, perhaps. The most important technique is developing intellectual empathy, the genuine capacity to understand perspectives different from your own, not just superficially, but to truly see the logic and evidence that could lead a reasonable person to a different conclusion. Building cognitive control also requires better emotional regulation skills. Since emotional hijacking is a primary autopilot trigger, Managing your emotional state is crucial for clear thinking under fire. One of the most effective techniques is cognitive reappraisal, changing how you interpret events. Instead of viewing a challenge as a threat, reframe it as a puzzle to be solved. This isn't naive positive thinking. It's choosing an interpretation that promotes analytical thought instead of panic. When you see a challenge as a threat, your brain activates fight or flight, which shuts down analysis. When you see the same challenge as an interesting problem, it triggers curiosity and enhances cognitive performance. Your brain's best weapon is a state of calm focus. Another powerful emotional regulation method is temporal distancing. When you're emotionally charged about a situation, ask yourself how you'll feel about it in 10 years or how someone from a different culture might view it. This perspective shift dials down the emotional intensity and helps restore clear thinking. The goal isn't to remove emotion. Emotions provide vital data about your values and intuitions. The goal is to prevent emotions from overwhelming your analytical machinery, so you can integrate both emotional and rational information effectively. Breaking free from mental autopilot is a continuous practice, not a one-time fix. Your brain will always prefer its energy-saving defaults, especially under stress. The key is developing the awareness to catch yourself and the tools to switch back to manual control. Your brain doesn't just make mistakes. It tells you consistent, predictable lies. These aren't intentional deceptions. They're systematic errors in thinking called cognitive biases. Understanding them is critical because they distort your thinking most when you feel most rational. Biases exist because your brain is trying to make sense of an infinitely complex world with limited resources. Its shortcuts work okay in many situations, but fail systematically in others. The first major category involves how you process information. Confirmation bias is arguably the most dangerous. Once you form an initial opinion, your brain automatically filters new information to support it, while ignoring or dismissing contradictory evidence. This happens even when you're trying to be objective. Your brain literally doesn't see information that clashes with your existing beliefs. This is why smart people can look at the same facts and reach opposite conclusions. Confirmation bias is especially destructive because it creates the illusion of validation. The more you research, the more proof you find for your initial view, making you increasingly confident you're right. You don't realize you're only seeing one side of the story. Closely related is the availability heuristic, which causes you to judge how likely something is based on how easily you can recall examples. If you remember something easily, you assume it's common. If you can't, you assume it's rare. This creates systematic distortions in risk assessment. People overestimate the danger of dramatic, rare events like plane crashes because they're memorable and heavily reported. Meanwhile, they underestimate common but mundane risks like heart disease because they don't create vivid mental images. The availability heuristic also warps your self-assessment. If you easily remember your failures, you'll underestimate your abilities. If you easily remember successes, you'll overestimate them. Another critical information bias is anchoring. The first piece of information you encounter heavily influences all subsequent judgments. Even when you know that initial info is irrelevant, anchoring explains why extreme first offers in negotiations are so effective, why first impressions are so sticky, and why it's so hard to update your opinions even with new evidence. Your brain treats the first input as a reference point and makes insufficient adjustments from there. The second major category involves prediction and probability biases. The planning fallacy causes you to systematically underestimate how long tasks will take and overestimate how likely you are to hit optimistic targets. This happens even with extensive experience of things always taking longer. The planning fallacy occurs because when picturing your own projects, you imagine the ideal plan unfolding perfectly. You don't adequately consider the reference class of similar projects and their actual outcomes, or account for unexpected delays. This bias affects everything from personal goals to massive government projects. It's why software timelines are always exceeded and why people consistently miss their self-improvement deadlines. Related is overconfidence bias, which makes you overestimate the accuracy of your judgments. When people are asked for confidence intervals, they give ranges that are far too narrow. Events they think have a 5% chance of happening actually occur 20 to 30% of the time. Overconfidence is particularly dangerous for complex decisions because it stops you from preparing for scenarios where your main plan fails. If you're too confident, you won't invest in contingency planning. The third category involves social and motivational biases. Self-serving bias causes you to interpret information in ways that make you look good. When you succeed, you credit your skill. When you fail, you blame external factors. This extends beyond personal outcomes to how you evaluate ideas and other people. You're more likely to believe information that supports your public stance and dismiss information that forces you to admit error. Attribution bias affects how you interpret behavior. When others mess up, you attribute it to their flaws. When you make the same mistake, you blame circumstances. This asymmetry makes it hard to learn from others or evaluate yourself accurately. Perhaps the most insidious bias is the bias blind spot. Your tendency to see cognitive biases in others while remaining blind to them in yourself. The more you learn about biases, the more confident you become that you can avoid them. But this confidence is usually misplaced. Studies show even experts in cognitive biases fall prey to them in their own decisions. Knowledge helps, but it's not enough. You need specific techniques and systems to consistently counter these biases. The first line of defense is building better decision-making processes. Instead of trusting your gut, create systematic approaches that force you to consider alternatives and gather disconfirming evidence. One powerful technique is red team analysis, where you deliberately assign someone or yourself to argue against your preferred position and punch holes in your logic. Another essential method is base rate analysis. Before making predictions, research what typically happens in similar situations. This counteracts overconfidence and the planning fallacy by grounding your expectations in empirical data, not optimistic scenarios. Reference class forecasting involves finding a broad group of similar projects and using the statistical distribution of their outcomes to calibrate your expectations. Instead of, how long will my project take? Ask, how long do projects like this typically take? Then adjust for what makes yours different. For complex choices, use structured frameworks like decision trees. These force you to state your assumptions clearly, quantify your judgments, and consider multiple factors systematically instead of relying on a vague gut feeling. Most importantly, cultivate intellectual humility about your own thinking. The goal isn't paralysis by doubt. The goal is confidence that's properly calibrated to the actual reliability of your judgment in different contexts. Be highly confident about things you truly know, and maintain healthy uncertainty about complex, novel, or emotionally charged situations where biases love to operate. Mental models are the ultimate levers for strategic thinking. Yet most people navigate life with only a handful of these cognitive frameworks. A mental model is a simplified representation of how something works, a thinking tool that helps you understand, predict, and navigate complexity. Their extraordinary power lies in transferring insights across domains. When you truly grasp a model, you can apply it to situations far beyond its origin. This is why polymaths often have insight specialists miss their applying models from different fields to illuminate new problems. Consider the model of compound growth, which most people only understand in finance. But it applies anywhere small, consistent actions create exponential results over time. Knowledge compounds when you build on what you already know. Relationships compound through repeated trust. Skills compound as new abilities stack on existing ones. Understanding compound growth as a universal model helps you spot these patterns everywhere and make better decisions about where to invest your time. You start looking for compound effects, not just linear gains. The first category of essential models involves systems and feedback loops. The most fundamental is the concept of feedback loops themselves. A feedback loop happens when a system's outputs are routed back as inputs, creating a cycle of cause and effect. Positive feedback loops amplify changes, creating exponential growth or collapse. When a company's success attracts better talent, leading to better products and more success, that's a positive loop. When a person's lack of confidence causes poor performance, deepening self-doubt, that's also a positive loop in a destructive direction. Negative feedback loops create stability by counteracting changes. When you're cold, you shiver to create heat. When a market price gets too high, demand drops. Forcing the price back down. Understanding these loops helps you see why some problems persist despite your efforts, why some strategies create explosive results, and how to design interventions that work with the system's natural flow. Another crucial systems model is leverage points, places in a system where a small change can produce a major shift. Most people focus on changing parameters within the system, working harder. Higher leverage comes from changing the system's structure, its goals, or the very paradigm that created it. For example, improving your health by eating better is a parameter change. Higher leverage might be redesigning your environment to make healthy choices automatic, or changing your identity to see yourself as a healthy person. The second category involves models for decision-making under uncertainty. Probabilistic thinking is the foundation. Instead of certainties, think in probability distributions and expected values. This doesn't mean assigning precise numbers to everything. It means developing an intuitive feel for uncertainty, variance, and expected outcomes. When considering a job offer, don't just ask, "Is this good?" Ask, "What's the range of possible outcomes?" Their probabilities? The expected value considering both upside and downside? Expected value thinking helps you make smarter choices when outcomes are uncertain. You multiply the probability of each outcome by its value and sum them. An opportunity with a 90% chance of modest success might be worse than one with a 30% chance of extraordinary success. Depending on the payoffs, closely related is optionality, creating situations where you have the right, but not the obligation, to take future action. Options are valuable because they offer upside while limiting downside. In your career, developing diverse skills creates optionality, giving you more choices as the market changes. In business, keeping financial reserves creates optionality to seize unexpected opportunities. The third category involves models for human behavior. One of the most powerful is incentives. People respond to incentives, often in ways the incentive designers never intended. If you want to understand why people act the way they do, don't listen to what they say. Look at what behaviors are actually rewarded and punished in their environment. If a company says it values innovation but only promotes risk avoiders, employees will avoid risk no matter the official values. Another crucial behavioral model is social proof. People use others' behavior as a guide for their own, especially when uncertain. Social proof explains fashion trends, financial bubbles, and why testimonials are so effective in marketing. Creating visible examples of desired behavior is often more powerful than just telling people what to do. The fourth category involves learning models. First principles thinking means breaking down complex problems into their most basic, fundamental truths and reasoning up from there. Most thinking is reasoning by analogy. This is like that, so I'll do what worked before. This works when the analogy is sound, but fails when surface similarities hide deep differences. First, principles thinking requires asking, what are the basic laws and constraints governing this? Instead of, what's been done before? This often reveals possibilities analogical thinking misses, because it's not constrained by existing solutions. An innovator famously applied this to rocket costs. Instead of accepting that rockets are expensive, he asked what materials they're made of and what those materials should cost. This led to reusable rockets that shattered cost assumptions. Another powerful learning model is mental simulation. Instead of abstract analysis, run detailed simulations in your mind, imagining how different scenarios could unfold. This helps you anticipate problems, spot opportunities, and build more robust strategies. Athletes use it to practice under pressure. Negotiators use it to anticipate countermoves. Leaders use it to foresee how decisions will ripple through their organization. The key to using mental models is building what one great thinker called lattice work. No single model is enough. You need multiple models that complement and reinforce each other. When facing a challenge, apply several different models and look for insights at their intersections, where multiple models point the same way. You can be more confident. Where they conflict, you need to dig deeper. The most powerful models are those that apply everywhere: network effects, economies of scale, opportunity cost, margin of safety. When you truly understand these, you see their patterns in everything, dramatically improving your ability to navigate complexity. Most people think by analogy. They encounter something new and ask, "What does this remind me of?" Then apply old solutions. This is efficient but keeps you trapped within the boundaries of convention. First principles thinking is a different path. Instead of reasoning by similarity, you deconstruct complex problems into their most basic components and build solutions from the ground up. It's the difference between copying what exists and deriving solutions from fundamental truths. This approach was used by ancient philosophers, great scientists, and modern innovators to create breakthroughs in industries everyone thought were settled. First principles thinking doesn't just help you solve problems better. It helps you solve problems others don't even see. The power is in revealing hidden assumptions and artificial constraints. Most problems come with invisible walls built by conventional wisdom. When you reason by analogy, you inherit these walls. When you reason from first principles, you question everything and often find many limitations are just arbitrary rules. Consider how one entrepreneur approached space travel costs. The convention was that rockets are inherently expensive. By reasoning from analogy, you'd tweak existing designs for minor cost savings, but using first principles, he asked, "What is a rocket fundamentally? What are the raw material costs? The fundamental physics?" This revealed the materials should cost a tiny fraction of the price. The insight was that rockets were expensive due to design choices and business models, not physics. Traditional rockets were disposable because they'd always been that way, but no physical law required it. This first principles analysis led to reusable rockets, slashing costs and opening new frontiers. The breakthrough was conceptual. From questioning assumptions everyone else took as gospel, the first step is identifying and questioning your assumptions. Most problems come preloaded with beliefs about what's possible and what's required. These are often so embedded you don't see them as assumptions. They just seem like reality. To surface them, constantly ask, why? And what if this weren't true? For every constraint, ask if it's a fundamental law of nature or just a human convention. Most turn out to be conventions. If you're trying to improve education, you might assume learning requires classrooms, lectures, and tests. But these are conventions, not fundamental requirements for learning. Questioning them opens possibilities for completely different educational models. The second step is breaking down problems into fundamental components. Find the basic elements, relationships, and principles that actually govern the situation, not the surface features or traditional categories. This decomposition often reveals that seemingly different problems are variations of the same core challenge, or that similar-looking problems are fundamentally different and need completely different approaches. Take traffic congestion. Conventional thinking adds more roads. A first principles analysis might reveal the fundamental issue is inefficient use of space and time, leading to solutions like shared autonomous vehicles or dynamic routing that don't require every person to own a car. The third step is rebuilding solutions from the ground up using only the fundamental components you've identified. This is where it becomes creative. You're not analyzing existing solutions. You're constructing new possibilities from basic building blocks. This reconstruction often leads to solutions that seem obvious in hindsight but were invisible before because they broke conventional rules. One powerful application is business model innovation. Most businesses operate on industry conventions about creating and delivering value. But these conventions are often arbitrary and can be reimagined from first principles. A streaming service applied this to entertainment. Instead of accepting the physical rental model, they asked what customers truly wanted: convenient, access to content leading from mail-order DVDs to streaming to original productions. Each step was a first principles reimagining. An e-commerce giant did similarly with retail. Instead of stores and local inventory, they asked what commerce fundamentally requires, leading to innovations in online retail, logistics, and cloud computing. First principles thinking is equally powerful for personal development. Most make career choices based on conventional paths. First principles career thinking asks, what problems do I find deeply interesting? What are my fundamental strengths? What would I work on if constraints didn't exist? This can reveal career possibilities that don't exist in traditional job categories, leading you to create new roles, combine skills in novel ways, or build businesses around unseen problems. It also transforms personal challenges. Instead of following diet trends, ask, what does my body fundamentally need to function optimally? This leads to personalized approaches for productivity. Instead of adopting a popular system, ask, what am I fundamentally trying to accomplish? How does my brain actually work best? This leads to customized methods that fit you perfectly. However, first principles thinking isn't for every decision. It takes significant mental energy. Use it for important, complex, or novel situations where conventional approaches are failing or breakthroughs are possible. For routine decisions, analogical thinking is more efficient. It also requires intellectual courage. When you question fundamentals and propose unconventional solutions, you'll face skepticism. This resistance is external and internal. Your own brain will resist because it's harder and creates more uncertainty than following familiar paths. The ultimate goal isn't to reject all convention or reinvent everything. It's to distinguish between fundamental truths and arbitrary conventions so you can leverage what works while being free to innovate where needed. The most powerful freedom is freedom from unchallenged assumptions. When you master first principles thinking, you gain conceptual independence. You're no longer limited by others' assumptions about what's possible. You see problems clearly and build solutions that fit reality, not inherited dogma. This independence is priceless in a fast-changing world where old approaches are constantly becoming obsolete. The caliber of your life is determined by the caliber of your choices. But most people make their worst decisions exactly when it matters most. When pressure mounts, the cognitive systems for strategic thinking get hijacked by primitive survival mechanisms meant for physical threats, not modern complexity. Understanding this hijack is the first step to maintaining decision quality under stress. When you perceive a threat or urgency, your nervous system releases stress hormones like cortisol. These chemicals narrow your focus, impair working memory, and shift your brain into reactive mode. This state helped our ancestors run from predators, but it sabotages your ability to navigate a negotiation or make a strategic business call, the same physiology that helps you dodge. A car will wreck your capacity for careful analysis. The first technique is stress inoculation. Deliberately practice decision-making under pressure so your brain learns to maintain cognitive function despite stress. Military, emergency crews, and elite athletes all use this. You can apply it by creating artificial pressure when practicing skills. If you present under pressure, practice while exercising or with time limits. If you make financial decisions under stress, use simulated scenarios with emotional and time pressure. The goal isn't immunity to stress. It's training your brain to access analytical thinking even when your nervous system is activated. Another crucial technique is implementing decision protocols predetermined. Frameworks that guide your thinking when your natural abilities are compromised by pressure. A systematic approach reduces the cognitive load of deciding how to think, letting you focus your limited mental resources on the actual analysis. One powerful protocol is the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act under pressure. You systematically observe the situation, orient yourself by understanding context and objectives, decide on action, and act decisively, ready to restart the cycle as things change. This prevents rushing in without analysis or getting stuck in paralysis. It provides structure while maintaining flexibility. For complex pressure decisions, use a rapid decision matrix. List your main options, identify the 3 most important evaluation criteria, and quickly score each option. This forces you to be explicit about priorities and gives a structured way to compare alternatives quickly. The matrix stops you from being overwhelmed or deciding based on a single, emotionally charged factor. Temporal thinking becomes vital under pressure. When rushed, you tend to focus only on immediate consequences, ignoring long-term implications. This leads to choices that fix now but create bigger problems later. Counter this with the 10th of October 10 rule. For any significant pressure decision, quickly. Consider how you'll feel about each option in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. This forces a temporal perspective even when urgency screams for immediate action. Sometimes the pressure itself is artificial. Before accepting time pressure as real, ask if the deadline is truly fixed or if you can buy more time for better analysis. Often, a small effort to negotiate for more time dramatically improves decision quality. When deadlines are real, focus on good enough decisions, not perfect ones. The enemy under pressure isn't imperfection, it's perfectionism. Perfectionism causes analysis paralysis, missed deadlines, and default outcomes worse than any conscious choice. Good enough decision-making means identifying the minimum viable criteria for an acceptable choice and picking the first option that meets them, rather than searching endlessly for the theoretical optimum. Another critical skill is recognizing when to defer. Not every urgent request needs an immediate answer. Sometimes the best response is to clearly state when you'll decide and what information you need. This often reveals that urgent decisions become irrelevant if you wait, or that better options appear once the artificial urgency fades. Strategic thinkers know that declining to make a premature decision is itself a strategic choice. The ability to recognize patterns before they're obvious is perhaps the most valuable skill in strategic thinking. Experts in every field, from chess masters to investors to doctors, share this capacity to see meaningful patterns in apparent chaos and use them to anticipate what's coming. Pattern recognition works on multiple levels. On the surface, you notice recurring event sequences, similar factor configurations, or familiar dynamics in new contexts. Deeper down, you recognize the underlying structures, incentives, and forces that generate these surface patterns. The most powerful pattern recognition combines specific domain expertise with general principles that transfer across areas. When you understand both the particular patterns of your field and the universal patterns that appear everywhere, you develop meta-pattern recognition, the ability to see patterns and how patterns form and evolve. Developing it starts with systematic observation and memory cultivation. Most people observe passively. Strategic pattern recognition requires active, structured observation where you deliberately look for connections, cycles, and recurring themes. Start by identifying key variables in your domain and tracking how they change over time. For business patterns, track economic indicators, consumer trends, tech adoption cycles, and competition. For relationships, observe communication patterns, conflict cycles, and trust-building sequences. Move beyond anecdotes to systematic data collection. Keep records. Look for recurring themes across different times and contexts. Test your pattern hypotheses against subsequent events. Historical analysis provides the foundation. Current events always feel unique, but most novel situations are variations of patterns that have played out before in different forms. Studying history helps you recognize these deeper patterns and avoid being fooled by surface differences. For business strategy, study how companies handled technological disruption, economic cycles, and competitive threats. For personal growth, study how others navigated career changes and major life challenges. For social understanding, study how societies dealt with similar pressures throughout history. The goal isn't to assume history repeats exactly, but to understand the underlying dynamics that tend to recur. As the saying goes, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Leading indicators are early signals that suggest larger patterns are beginning. These are changes that happen before the main trend becomes visible to most. Identifying reliable leading indicators gives you a major strategic advantage. You can position yourself before the pattern is obvious. In economics, leading indicators might be credit condition changes, early consumer sentiment shifts, or emerging disruptive technologies. In organizations, they might be key personnel changes, resource allocation shifts, or early customer feedback on new initiatives. The challenge is distinguishing meaningful signals from random noise. Not every early change starts a larger pattern. Developing reliable pattern recognition requires calibrating your sensitivity to avoid missing signals or chasing false alarms. Scenario planning enhances pattern recognition by forcing you to think through how different factor combinations could create various futures. Instead of predicting one future, develop multiple plausible scenarios and identify the early signs that would make each more likely. This helps you recognize patterns as they emerge, not after they're set. For each scenario, identify the key driving variables and their early indicators. Then monitor those indicators systematically, updating scenario probabilities as new information arrives. Cross-domain pattern recognition finds structural similarities between seemingly different fields. The same underlying patterns often appear in business, biology, psychology, and social systems. When you recognize these cross-domain patterns, you can transfer insights from well-understood areas to emerging ones. For example, network effects appear in tech platforms, social movements, and ecosystems. Understanding them in one domain helps you anticipate them in others. Viral spread patterns appear in diseases, social media, innovation adoption, and financial panics. Epidemiological models can provide insights into how ideas or market fears might spread through networks. Anti-fragility patterns appear in biology, technology, and organization systems that get stronger under stress, not just survive it. Recognizing these helps you design strategies that benefit from volatility. Cycle recognition is especially valuable for timing and resource management. Many patterns are cyclical, repeating with predictable rhythms. Economic cycles, fashion cycles, political cycles, and personal energy cycles all follow recognizable patterns. The key insight is that their emotional and psychological components are often more predictable than their technical details. Even if you can't predict exactly when a market cycle will turn, you can often recognize when sentiment has reached unsustainable extremes that typically precede a reversal. Pattern degradation is equally important to spot. Patterns that were reliable can become less so as underlying conditions change. Technology disruption often works by breaking patterns that seem permanent. Digital photography broke patterns that governed film for decades. Social media transformed communication patterns that were stable for generations. Stay alert for signs. You'll recognize patterns are losing predictive power. When established patterns start giving unexpected results, it's often a signal that underlying conditions have shifted and new patterns are emerging. Complex problems often feel overwhelming because your brain sees them as one massive challenge, not a collection of smaller, manageable parts. Advanced problem decomposition transforms seemingly impossible tasks into systematic workflows where each component can be understood and addressed individually. The key insight is that complexity is often an illusion created by interconnection, not inherent difficulty. Most complex problems are multiple simple problems that interact. When you try to solve everything at once, the interactions cause confusion. When you decompose effectively, you can handle each part systematically while managing the interactions explicitly. Structural decomposition starts by identifying the core components of your problem and how they relate. Move beyond surface descriptions to understand the challenges underlying. Architecture. Start by asking, what are the main subsystems or categories here? For a business challenge, these might be market factors, internal capabilities, competitive dynamics, regulations, and finances. For a personal challenge, they might be skill gaps, resource limits, emotional barriers, time constraints, and relationships. Once you have the main components, map the relationships between them. Which influence which? Where are the feedback loops? Which relationships are causal versus correlational? This mapping often reveals that one complex problem is actually several simpler problems with defined interactions. Functional decomposition breaks down problems by the different functions or Processes involved. Instead of asking what the problem consists of, ask what needs to happen to solve it. This is powerful for operational challenges where you need to design or improve complex workflows for each major function. Identify the required inputs, the transformation that needs to occur, and the outputs that should result. Break down each function into subfunctions until every component is clearly actionable. This often reveals hidden dependencies and resource needs that weren't obvious holistically. It also helps identify critical path activities that could bottleneck your entire solution if not handled properly. Temporal decomposition breaks problems down by time horizons and sequence. Many problems feel overwhelming because they mix immediate fires with long-term strategic issues. Separating these temporal layers lets you address each with the right tools and timelines, identify which aspects need immediate attention, which require medium-term development, and which involve long-term positioning. Create separate work streams for each time horizon while coordinating between them. This separation often reveals that some urgent issues are symptoms of long-term problems needing strategic fixes, while some strategic issues have immediate implications needing tactical responses. Constraint-based decomposition focuses on identifying and categorizing the different limitations you face. Constraints often interact in complex ways, making problems seem harder than they are. When you identify and categorize constraints explicitly, you can often address them systematically or work around them creatively. Theory of constraints analysis helps you find which constraint is currently limiting your progress most severely. Address the primary constraint, and a different one typically becomes the limiter. This prevents wasting effort on improvements that won't boost overall performance. Some constraints are immutable facts you must work around. Others are resource limits that could be addressed with investment. Still others are self-imposed restrictions based on assumptions that could be challenged. Stakeholder decomposition identifies all the different people or groups who influence or are influenced by your problem. Complex problems often remain unsolved because solutions ignore important stakeholders or fail to understand their different perspectives and incentives. Map all stakeholders. Understand their interests and concerns. Identify potential conflicts and design solutions that address the legitimate needs of all key parties. This analysis often reveals that technical solutions fail not because they don't work, but because they don't account for human and political dynamics. Root cause decomposition uses systematic analysis to find the fundamental drivers behind surface problems. Most visible issues are symptoms of deeper causes. Fixing symptoms gives temporary relief but doesn't prevent recurrence. The 5 whys technique involves asking why repeatedly to drill down from symptoms to root causes. When a problem occurs, ask why it happened. Then ask why that happened. Continue until you reach causes that are truly fundamental, not just symptoms of something deeper. Fishbone diagrams provide a more structured approach. Draw the problem as the fish's head. Identify major categories of potential causes as the main bones. For each category, identify specific potential causes as smaller bones. This visual approach ensures you consider all potential cause categories, not just the obvious ones. Dependency decomposition focuses on understanding how different problem elements depend on each other. Some components can be addressed independently. Others need specific sequencing or coordination. Create a dependency map showing which problem components must be completed before others can begin, which can be worked on in parallel, and which have complex interdependencies needing careful coordination. This analysis often reveals that problems seeming to need simultaneous progress on all fronts actually have logical sequences, where early progress creates the foundation for later breakthroughs. Value chain decomposition breaks problems down according to the sequence of value-creating activities. This is useful for business problems but applies anywhere you're trying to create value through connected steps. Map each step in your value creation process. Identify where value is currently being created or destroyed. Look for bottlenecks or inefficiencies in the chain and design improvements that optimize the whole system, not just individual parts. Strategic thinking isn't a cold, purely rational exercise. Emotions provide crucial intelligence about your values, priorities, and potential outcomes that logic alone might miss. The key is integrating emotional intelligence with analytical thinking, not treating them as opposites. Emotional intelligence in strategic contexts involves four main capabilities: emotional awareness, emotional regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. Each enhances your strategic thinking by providing additional information and influence. Emotional awareness starts with recognizing your own emotional responses and understanding what they're telling you. Emotions aren't random weather. They're information processing systems that evaluate situations against your deep values and past experiences. Fear can signal risks your analytical mind overlooked. Excitement might indicate opportunities aligning with your core motivations. Frustration can reveal conflicts between your current approach and your underlying goals. Learn to decode these emotional signals, not ignore them or be controlled by them. When you have strong emotional reactions to strategic decisions, pause and ask what intelligence these emotions are providing. Sometimes they reveal unstated assumptions or hidden concerns that need addressing. Other times they indicate value conflicts needing resolution. Occasionally, they signal pattern recognition happening below consciousness that deserves further investigation. Emotional regulation in strategic contexts doesn't mean suppressing feelings or making purely rational calls. It means managing your emotional state so emotions inform your thinking without overwhelming your analytical capacity. When facing high-stakes decisions, your emotional state affects your cognitive abilities, risk assessment, creativity, and capacity to consider multiple viewpoints. Learning to regulate your emotions is therefore a cognitive performance strategy. Techniques include cognitive reappraisal consciously, reframing challenging situations to promote more effective emotional responses. Reframe setbacks as learning opportunities, competition as benchmarks for improvement. Physical regulation like controlled breathing or mindfulness can restore cognitive function when emotional arousal interferes with clear thinking. Temporal regulation involves adjusting your time perspective to reduce emotional intensity when overwhelmed by immediate pressure, expanding your time horizon to see how current challenges fit into longer-term patterns can reduce reactivity and restore strategic perspective. Social awareness involves reading the emotional states and motivations of others in your strategic situation. Others' emotions provide valuable data about their priorities, concerns, and likely responses to different approaches. This social emotional intelligence helps you predict reactions to your initiatives, identify sources of resistance or support, and design approaches that work with human psychology. Pay attention to incongruences between what people say and how they feel. Words can be controlled. Emotional expressions are harder to fake. When emotional signals contradict verbal statements, the emotions usually provide more accurate information about true positions. Look for emotional patterns in groups. Collective emotions like excitement, anxiety, or resignation affect how groups process information and make decisions. Understanding these collective states helps you time initiatives and frame communications effectively. Relationship management uses emotional intelligence to influence and coordinate with others for strategic objectives. This isn't manipulation. It's skillful communication that acknowledges the emotional dimensions of human interaction. Building trust requires emotional consistency and reliability over time. People need to feel you understand their concerns, not just that you can make logical arguments. Strategic initiatives often fail not from analytical flaws, but from not addressing the emotional needs of key stakeholders. Influence through emotional intelligence connects your strategic objectives with others' emotional motivations. Instead of just giving logical reasons why people should support your approach, help them see how it serves their needs for security, recognition, growth, or contribution. Conflict resolution often requires addressing emotional dynamics before logical negotiations can be productive. When people feel misunderstood or disrespected, they won't engage in good faith problem solving, create emotional learning loops. Situations with intense emotions usually involve important values, unexpected outcomes, or conflicts between mental models. Use them as learning labs. What triggered the strong emotions? What values or expectations were involved? What does this reveal about your assumptions or blind spots? How might you approach similar situations differently? Systematically extracting strategic insights from emotionally charged experiences accelerates your development as a strategic thinker. Intuition deserves special mention. Intuitive judgments aren't magical. They're rapid processing of complex patterns by unconscious systems. These can sometimes detect patterns and relationships conscious analysis misses, especially in domains where you have deep experience. The key is distinguishing reliable, intuitive insights from emotional biases or wishful thinking. Reliable intuition usually feels calm and clear. Emotional bias feels charged and reactive. Test intuitive insights with systematic analysis when possible, but don't dismiss them when analysis is inconclusive. Sometimes intuitive pattern recognition provides early warnings about complex situations that logic will only confirm later. In a fast-changing world, rigid intelligence becomes a liability. The cognitive frameworks that worked in stable environments can become obstacles when conditions shift fundamentally. Adaptable intelligence is the ability to update your thinking patterns, abandon ineffective approaches, and develop new capabilities as circumstances demand. The foundation is intellectual humility, recognizing that your current understanding is provisional and improvable. This doesn't mean lacking confidence. It means holding beliefs lightly enough to update them with better evidence. Most people suffer from cognitive rigidities that prevent adaptation. Confirmation bias makes you seek supporting information while ignoring contradictions. Sunk cost fallacy makes you persist with failing approaches due to past investment. Status quo bias makes change feel riskier than staying put. Overcoming these requires cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch thinking modes and adjust mental frameworks based on situational demands. Active belief. Updating is regularly examining your core assumptions and actively seeking contradictory evidence. Most people only update when contradictory evidence is overwhelming. Adaptable thinkers update continuously based on small signals. This doesn't mean being wishy-washy. It means maintaining uncertainty calibrated to the strength of your evidence and the stability of underlying conditions. Implement regular belief audits. Examine assumptions about important life or work areas. Ask, what evidence originally convinced me? What evidence would convince me I'm wrong? Have I looked for it recently? For beliefs influencing major decisions, actively seek out intelligent dissent and genuinely try to understand the reasoning. This ensures your beliefs withstand informed scrutiny. Mental model. Diversification means developing multiple frameworks for understanding the same phenomena. Like financial diversification reduces investment risk, cognitive diversification reduces the risk of being blindsided by changes. Your primary models don't anticipate. Study how different disciplines approach similar problems. Economists, psychologists, biologists, and historians often have completely different frameworks. Each highlights different aspects of reality and suggests different intervention strategies. Practice switching mental models when analyzing the same situation. How would an economist see this? A systems theorist? A game theorist? This multi-perspective analysis often reveals insights single framework thinking misses. Scenario-based thinking builds adaptability by forcing consideration of how strategies might need to change under different conditions. Instead of planning for one expected future, develop contingency plans for multiple possible futures. For each major strategic decision, identify key assumptions and consider how your strategy would need to change if they proved wrong. This reveals hidden assumptions in your current thinking. Learning velocity becomes crucial. It's not enough to learn. You must learn faster than your environment changes. This requires more efficient learning processes and selectivity about what to learn. Focus learning on meta skills that transfer across domains. Critical thinking, pattern recognition, communication, learning how to learn. These remain valuable even when specific technical knowledge becomes obsolete. Develop rapid experimentation capabilities to test new approaches quickly and cheaply before major resource commitment. This experimental mindset treats strategies as hypotheses to be tested, not plans to be executed regardless of feedback loop optimization, designs better systems for detecting when approaches aren't working. Many get stuck with ineffective strategies because they lack reliable failure detection. Mechanisms. Create leading indicators that signal when strategies are working or failing before final outcomes are clear. Identify key metrics that would change first if your approach were failing and monitor them systematically. Build feedback systems that overcome natural cognitive biases. Since you're motivated to interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting your existing approaches, design objective measurement systems that give clear performance signals. Anti-fragile design principles help build strategies that get stronger under stress, not just survive it. Instead of just defending against problems, find ways to benefit from volatility and uncertainty. Develop strategies with built-in optionality approaches that provide upside while limiting downside. Maintain diversity in your approaches so some can benefit when others struggle. Build redundancy so individual failures don't cause systemic collapse. Network-based learning leverages others' insights and experiences to accelerate adaptation. No individual can learn fast enough to keep up with exponential change, but networks can process information and develop insights much faster. Cultivate relationships with people having different perspectives, expertise, and information sources. Create information-sharing relationships where you learn from others' experiments without repeating all their mistakes. The ultimate goal of adaptable intelligence isn't to become someone who changes constantly, but someone who changes, appropriately maintaining stability in core values and long-term objectives while remaining flexible in methods and short-term tactics. True strategic influence isn't manipulation. It's understanding human psychology deeply enough to present ideas in ways that resonate with how people naturally think and decide. The most powerful influences don't force mind changes. They create conditions where people naturally arrive at better conclusions. The foundation is understanding that people decide based on a complex mix of emotions, social pressures, cognitive shortcuts, and rational analysis. When you grasp these decision processes, you can present information aligned with human psychology, not fighting it. Reciprocity is a powerful principle. People feel obligated to return favors. But strategic reciprocity isn't about keeping score. It's about creating genuine value for others as a foundation for mutual benefit. The key is that reciprocity is triggered more by gesture thoughtfulness than monetary value. A small favor showing understanding of specific needs creates more psychological obligation than an expensive generic gift. Strategic reciprocity involves identifying what others truly value and providing it before asking for anything. Information, connections, recognition, or thoughtful attention to their concerns. Social proof leverages people's tendency to look to others for behavioral guidance, especially when uncertain. This is strongest when the others are similar or the situation is ambiguous. Strategic use involves highlighting examples of people your audience identifies with who have already adopted the behavior or belief. Instead of just logic, show that reasonable people like them have reached similar conclusions. Social proof is amplified by demonstrating momentum. People want to join emerging movements, not declining ones. Showing growing adoption creates psychological pressure to join rather than be left behind. Commitment and consistency leverage people's desire to appear consistent with previous statements and behaviors. Once people take a public position or make a commitment, they feel pressure to behave consistently. Strategic commitment building involves getting people to articulate their own reasons for your position, not just presenting your reasons. When people generate their own arguments, they become psychologically invested in ways external persuasion can't achieve. Small initial commitments often lead to larger ones later. People who agree to small requests become more likely to agree to larger related requests because they develop a self-image as supporting that activity. Framing effects show that how Information is presented often matters more than what information is presented. The same facts can lead to completely different decisions. Based on framing and comparisons, strategic framing involves presenting information in contexts that lead to desired conclusions. This isn't deception. It's choosing truthful presentations that emphasize the most relevant aspects. Loss framing tends to be more motivating than gain framing for risk-averse decisions. People are more motivated to avoid losing something they have than to gain something new. When presenting change, emphasize what people risk losing by not changing, not just what they might gain. Anchoring effects show that initial reference points heavily influence later judgments. The first number in a negotiation, the first option considered, or the first interpretation encountered all serve as anchors that bias subsequent thinking. Strategic anchoring involves carefully controlling reference points established early. In negotiations, this might mean making the first offer to set a favorable anchor. In presentations, establishing ambitious goals early can make more modest requests seem reasonable by comparison. Authority and expertise influence works because people defer to perceived experts, especially in areas where they lack confidence in their own judgment. But authority isn't just credentials. It's demonstrated competence and trustworthiness. Building strategic authority requires establishing credibility through demonstrated expertise, sharing valuable insights, making accurate predictions, acknowledging knowledge limits. The most persuasive authority combines competence with humility. This honesty increases persuasive power by signaling trustworthiness. Scarcity and urgency can motivate action, but must be genuine for long-term effectiveness. False scarcity backfires when discovered. Real scarcity can help overcome procrastination. Strategic scarcity focuses on unique value propositions that genuinely can't be obtained elsewhere, not artificial time limits. Instead of false urgency, help people understand the opportunity costs of delay and genuine risks of inaction. Most people approach problems by focusing on events and symptoms, while ignoring the underlying systems that generate them. Systems thinking involves understanding the structures, relationships, and feedback loops that create observed patterns in complex situations. The fundamental insight is that behavior is generated by structure. When you see recurring problems, the root cause usually lies in the system's design, not the individual actors. Changing behavior without changing systems typically leads to temporary improvements that revert. Systems have key properties. They consist of elements connected through relationships and organized around a purpose. The relationships are often more important than the elements. Systems show emergent properties from interactions, not individual components. Understanding feedback loops is central. Reinforcing loops amplify changes, creating exponential growth or decline. When success brings more resources, leading to more success, that's reinforcing. When problems create stress, leading to poor decisions and more problems, that's also reinforcing destructively. Balancing loops creates stability by counteracting changes. When market prices rise, demand decreases, causing prices to fall. When cold, you shiver for heat. Warming up and reducing shivering, most complex systems have multiple loops operating together. Understanding which dominates in different conditions helps predict system behavior and identify effective interventions. Leverage points are places within systems where small changes can produce big impacts. A systems theorist identified a hierarchy from least to most effective intervention points. Low leverage interventions change numbers within systems, adjusting budgets or metrics. These often fail because system structure eventually overwhelms. Numerical changes. Higher leverage comes from changing system elements, replacing key people, introducing new technology. These are more effective but work within existing structural constraints. Even higher leverage comes from changing connections within systems, modifying information flows, decision authorities, or reporting relationships. Small changes in who talks to whom or who has what information can transform entire organizational dynamics. Changing the rules governing systems provides very high leverage. Rules include policies, procedures, incentives, and formal constraints. When you change rules, You change the structure all other elements operate within. Changing the power to make rules represents even higher leverage. This shifts who has authority to establish policies and structural elements, constitutional changes, governance reforms, and power redistributions often have profound long-term impacts because they change how all subsequent rules are made. The highest leverage point is changing the paradigms or mindsates from which systems arise. Paradigms are deeply held beliefs and assumptions determining how people interpret reality and what they consider possible. When paradigms shift, entire systems restructure around new organizing principles. Paradigm shifts are difficult because paradigms are largely unconscious and reinforced by existing systems. People within paradigms can't easily see them because the paradigm shapes what seems normal, but they offer the greatest transformation potential because they change everything. Downstream. When scientific paradigms shift, entire research programs redirect. When business paradigms shift, entire industries restructure. When personal paradigms shift, entire life patterns change. Systems thinking also reveals unintended consequences. Complex systems often respond to interventions in unanticipated ways because interventions trigger feedback loops and adaptations. Throughout the system, policy resistance occurs when systems push back against interventions. When you try to force change, the system often develops countervailing forces that neutralize your efforts. This is why many well-intentioned policies fail or create opposite effects. Understanding system structure helps design interventions that work with system dynamics, not against them. Instead of overpowering systems, identify natural leverage points where the system wants to change and focus efforts there. Delays in feedback loops create additional complexity. Actions often have consequences that appear much later, making learning from experience or adjusting strategies difficult. By the time you see action results, conditions may have changed significantly. These delays explain why many problems persist despite solution attempts. People try solutions, don't see immediate results, conclude they don't work, and try different approaches before original solutions have had time to take effect. Systems archetype patterns represent common structural problems, appearing across contexts. Learning them helps diagnose system problems faster and apply proven interventions. The fixes that fail archetype happens when quick fixes temporarily improve symptoms but ultimately worsen underlying problems. The shifting the burden archetype happens when addressing symptoms rather than root causes weakens capacity to solve fundamental problems. Understanding these archetypes helps avoid common system traps and design more effective long-term solutions. Strategic communication isn't just clarity. It's understanding how different audiences process information, what motivates action, and how to structure interactions for mutually beneficial outcomes, even with initially conflicting interests. The foundation is audience analysis. Before crafting any message, understand who you're communicating with, what they care about, how they decide, and their constraints. The same information for different audiences needs completely different approaches. Effective analysis goes beyond demographics to psychographics, decision processes, and situational context. What are their current beliefs? What sources do they trust? What would motivate change? What barriers might prevent action even if convinced? Understanding decision authority is crucial. Often your contact isn't the final decision maker but influences them. Understanding this chain helps tailor messages for effective transmission through multiple levels. Message structure significantly impacts comprehension and persuasion. The primacy effect means first presented information disproportionately influences overall impressions. The recency effect means last presented information is most easily remembered. Understanding these helps structure communications for maximum impact. For complex messages, use the pyramid principle. Start with conclusions, then supporting arguments, then detailed evidence. This helps busy audiences grasp main points even without processing all details. For persuasive messages, consider problem agitation solution. Establish a problem exists. Help the audience feel the costs of not solving it, then present your solution as the most effective response. Strategic storytelling leverages the brain's natural tendency for narrative. Stories are more memorable than abstract arguments and create emotional engagement logic. But strategic stories aren't just entertainment. They're vehicles for conveying complex ideas compellingly. Effective strategic stories follow the hero's journey. A protagonist faces a challenge, struggles with obstacles, and succeeds through specific actions or insights. Your audience should see themselves as the hero, with your recommendations providing the needed insights. Use concrete details and specific examples, not abstract generalizations. The brain processes concrete information more easily. When explaining complex strategies, ground them in specific, visualizable scenarios. Negotiation is communication under apparent conflict, aiming for solutions serving everyone's essential interests. The key insight is most negotiations aren't truly zero-sum. One person's gain doesn't require another's loss. Principled negotiation focuses on interests, not positions. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are why they want it. Different positions can serve the same underlying interests. Understanding those reveals creative solutions not apparent when focusing only on stated positions. Preparation is crucial. Before important negotiations, research other parties' likely interests, constraints, and alternatives. Understand your own best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This determines your bargaining power. Develop multiple options serving both parties' interests, not just advocating your preferred outcome. More options increase the likelihood of finding solutions working for everyone. Separate people from problems by addressing relationship issues explicitly, not letting them complicate substantive discussions. When people feel attacked, they defend themselves rather than solve problems collaboratively. Use objective criteria to evaluate options, not subjective preferences. When both parties agree on fair standards, negotiations become problem-solving exercises, not contests of will. Active listening is perhaps the most important negotiation skill. Most people listen just enough to formulate rebuttals, not truly understand the other's perspective. Strategic listeners ask questions to understand, underline concerns, and repeat back what they've heard to confirm understanding. This often reveals that apparent conflicts are based on misunderstandings or that different parties care about different aspects, enabling solutions addressing everyone's primary concerns. Difficult conversations require special strategies because emotions run high and people naturally avoid or mishandle them. The key is structuring these conversations to address substantive issues and relationship dynamics simultaneously. Start by establishing shared purpose and mutual respect before diving into disagreement. Remind everyone what you're trying to accomplish together and affirm respect even when disagreeing on specifics. Use I statements to express your perspective without attacking character. Instead of, "You always interrupt," say, "I feel frustrated when interrupted because I lose my train of thought." Focus on specific behaviors and their impact, not generalizations about character or intentions. This makes feedback easier to hear and act on. Multi-stakeholder communication coordinates messages across multiple audiences with different interests. The challenge is maintaining consistency while adapting to each audience's specific needs and perspectives. Develop a core message architecture consistent across audiences, allowing tactical adaptations in emphasis, examples, and supporting arguments. This ensures different stakeholders receive consistent information in ways resonating with their specific concerns. Strategic planning isn't predicting the future. It's developing robust approaches, working across multiple possible futures while positioning you to adapt as conditions change. The most effective strategic thinkers combine ambitious, long-term vision with flexible short-term tactics. Vision development starts with understanding core values and fundamental motivations. What do you care about deeply enough to pursue despite difficulty or time? What impact do you want? What legacy? These aren't just philosophical. They're practical foundations. When clear about fundamental values and long-term aspirations, you can make consistent decisions. Even facing novel situations or unexpected opportunities, effective visions are specific enough for direction, but flexible enough for different achievement paths. Instead of committing to specific tactics or timelines, Focus on desired outcomes and guiding principles, scenario planning bridges, long-term vision and practical action by considering multiple future possibilities. Instead of predicting one future, identify several plausible scenarios and develop strategies working across them. Start by identifying key uncertainties significantly impacting your strategic situation: technological developments, economic trends, regulatory changes, competitive dynamics, or social shifts. For each uncertainty, consider how evolution could help or hinder your objectives. Develop 3 to 5 distinct scenarios combining these uncertainties differently. One might be rapid tech change with growth, another slow change with stagnation, another regulatory shift changing the landscape. For each scenario, identify best strategies and early warning signals suggesting it's becoming likely. This doesn't predict the future, but prepares you to recognize changes early and adapt. Strategic resource allocation involves conscious choices about investing time, attention, and energy to maximize long-term value creation. Not all opportunities are equally valuable. Not all problems deserve equal attention. Use the 80-20 principle to identify the few activities creating most results. Most people spread efforts too thinly, making progress everywhere but breakthroughs nowhere. Focus best resources on highest leverage opportunities while maintaining adequate attention to essential maintenance. This might mean saying no to good opportunities to fully commit to great ones. Building strategic capabilities involves developing skills, relationships, and resources remaining valuable across multiple scenarios and timeframes. Instead of just optimizing for current conditions, invest in capabilities providing options and advantages regardless of change. Meta skills like critical thinking, communication, learning ability, and relationship building tend to remain valuable even when specific technical skills become obsolete. Developing them provides insurance against uncertainty. Strategic relationships with people having complementary skills, different perspectives, or access to different opportunities create mutual value and expand options. These need to be genuine and reciprocal, not purely transactional. Building reputation and credibility in your field creates compound advantages over time. Reputation attracts opportunities, resources, and collaborators otherwise difficult to access. But reputation building requires consistent excellence over extended periods. Risk management involves preparing for potential problems without paralysis. Every strategy has risks. The goal is taking intelligent risks while avoiding catastrophic ones. Identify potential failure modes for your approach and develop contingency plans for the most significant risks. This isn't planning for every problem, but having prepared responses for problems. Derailing your entire strategy, maintain adequate reserves and backup options so individual setbacks don't force abandoning your overall direction. This might be financial reserves, alternative approaches to key objectives, or supportive relationships during difficult periods. Implementation planning translates strategic vision into concrete actions and milestones. Without effective implementation, brilliant strategies remain ideas. The key is creating systematic approaches, maintaining momentum while allowing course corrections, break long-term objectives into intermediate milestones, providing progress feedback, and allowing strategy adjustments. Milestones should be significant for real progress, but achievable for motivation. Develop systematic review processes, regularly assessing both progress toward objectives and continued validity of underlying assumptions. Strategy isn't set and forget. It requires ongoing adaptation. Based on new information and changing conditions, create accountability systems, maintaining discipline in executing strategic priorities despite day-to-day distractions. This might be regular reviews with mentors, tracking systems monitoring key metrics, or public commitments creating external motivation. Knowledge without implementation is just intellectual entertainment. The difference between understanding, strategic thinking, and achieving results lies in consistently applying these principles in real situations. The implementation challenge is that strategic thinking requires overriding your brain's default patterns. Your brain evolved for immediate survival in simple environments, not complex decision-making. Applying these principles needs conscious effort and systematic practice. Until new patterns become habitual. Start with one principle at a time. Choose the concept most relevant to your current challenges and focus on applying it consistently for weeks before adding more. Deliberate practice is key to mastery. Practice principles in increasingly challenging situations with gradually higher stakes. Start with low-risk decisions where you can experiment without serious consequences. Keep a decision journal recording important decisions, your reasoning process, principles applied, and outcomes. Review it regularly to identify thinking patterns and improvement areas. Create implementation triggers reminding you to apply strategic principles when most needed. Specific questions before important decisions. Checklists for complex problems. Or regular reviews ensuring strategic thinking about priorities. Mental rehearsal accelerates skill development. Spend time imagining how you'd apply principles to hypothetical scenarios or past situations where you could have thought more strategically. This mental practice strengthens neural pathways. Find opportunities to teach these concepts. Teaching forces deeper understanding and provides application practice. It also creates accountability for your own implementation. Build strategic thinking into your environment by surrounding yourself with strategic thinkers and creating systems supporting strategic decision-making. Your environment heavily influences thinking patterns, so design it to reinforce desired mental habits. Measure progress by tracking thinking process quality, not just decision outcomes. Good strategic thinking improves outcome probability but doesn't guarantee it. Focus on whether you're consistently applying sound principles, not whether every decision works perfectly. Common implementation obstacles include perfectionism, overanalyzing instead of acting, emotional reactivity, overriding strategic thinking under stress, and social pressure, abandoning strategic approaches when others pressure different. Action. Overcome perfectionism by setting good enough standards for different decision types and committing to act once reached. Most decisions are reversible and can be improved through iteration. Not perfect initial analysis. Manage emotional reactivity by recognizing triggers and having predetermined responses, restoring strategic thinking when emotions run high, taking breaks. Consulting trusted advisors or using breathing techniques. Handle social pressure by being selective about whose opinions you consider for strategic decisions. Not everyone thinks strategically. Well-meaning advice from non-strategic thinkers can undermine decision quality. The ultimate goal isn't occasional strategic thinking, but making it your natural default for important challenges. This transformation happens gradually through consistent practice. Strategic thinking mastery shows in several characteristics. You naturally consider multiple time frames. You automatically look for underlying patterns and systems, not just react to surface events. You consistently seek contradictory information. You approach problems by breaking them down systematically. You maintain appropriately calibrated confidence. You influence others through understanding their perspectives. You adapt strategies when conditions change. Most importantly, you take responsibility for your thinking quality, not blaming circumstances when things don't go as planned. You view every challenge as a chance to refine strategic abilities and every setback as feedback improving future decisions. Mastery is not a destination, but a direction of travel. The journey is ongoing. The world grows more complex and fast-changing, making strategic thinking increasingly valuable. The principles you've learned will serve you for life, evolving and deepening as you apply them to new challenges. Your brain now has the tools to master any situation. The only question is whether you'll use them consistently enough to make strategic thinking your natural way of being. If this rewired how you see thinking, pay it forward, give this video a like, and make sure to subscribe Rapidus for more deep dives into mastering your mind. The choice, as always, is yours.